Oh, Bennett, greetings. Welcome to Thespian Bard Reviews, a show where I take an old film or some great novel and tell you what I think. Today we will be discussing a wonderful and interesting adaptation of one of my favorite novels, the Jane Austen classic Pride and Prejudice. The 1940 film of Pride and Prejudice, starring Laurence, Olivier, and Greer Garson as Darcy and Elizabeth, and in my opinion, one of the best pieces of Pride and Prejudice fanfiction ever. Yes, ladies and gentlemen, I did say fanfiction. Now let's get to the chase, shall we? The film starts off with the Bennett woman out shopping at the milliner's. We are then given the conversation where Bingley and Party are first discussed. Charlotte is also introduced at this time, and... wait. Charlotte is pretty? This is a common theme in film versions, and we'll get back to this at a later date. So in any case, we are then introduced to the rest of the Bennett sisters, and... Mr. Wickham? What's he doing here? Oh well, moving on. The Bennets and the Lucases race for their respective homes in a fun carriage chase sequence. We finally get to the first scene of the book, and I must say, this is one of the most likable Bennett families in existence. We then go to the Meryton Assembly, where Wickham asks Lydia to introduce him to Elizabeth when the dance is over. And instead, she does it in mid-dance. In any case, Wickham and Elizabeth engage in some small talk, then the dance ends and the Bingleys enter. Miss Bingley in this dark, bejeweled dress, and we see the first appearance of Darcy in public. Mrs. Bennet goes over to her daughters, and Mary is told to sparkle. Just a little. So a waltz starts up, and you can just imagine that it's basically a combination of the party at the Lucases, the Meryton Assembly, the Phillips party, as Mr. Wickham reveals his Darcy woes, then brings her to the next stop. Quiet, you! But I have to admit, she tells Wickham she knows nothing of what happened, and she's on his side, but then Darcy was really weird. So I love that he says that every Hottentot can dance, instead of just every savage can dance. Moving on, however, we then go to Jane going to dine with Mr. Bingley, and then to a scene with her sick in bed, as the doctor tells her what's going on, and the others react. It's actually quite amusing and comforting as well. Then Miss Elizabeth arrives, and more conversation is to be had. Then Mr. Bennett offers up this little gem. Well, we are hoping that Miss Elizabeth can manage to catch cold of her own and stay long enough to get engaged to Mr. Darcy. Then, if a snowstorm could be arranged, we send Kitty over. But if a young man should happen to be in the house, a young man who likes singing, of course, who can discuss philosophy, Mary could go. Then, if a dashing young soldier in a handsome uniform should appear for Lydia, everything would be perfect, my dear. Then we see more of Darcy and Elizabeth reacting, and if you think Colin Firth or Matthew McFadden was obvious, Laurence Olivier's Darcy is practically spelling it out with big, giant letters. I love you. Oh, and Elizabeth and Jane are apparently already aware of Mr. Colin's visit. What did I tell you? Now we jump to Longbourn, where Mrs. Bennett is discussing her great luck in going to pick up Jane. So unsurprising, considering their awareness of the Collins' visit. Oh, I do love time-constrained plots. In any case, it turns out they are waiting for Mr. Collins so they can have dinner. And... wait! Did Mrs. Bennett just call the male servant who seems to be their butler Matthews? It should be hell! In any case, Mr. Bennett comes in and we finally are introduced to Mr. Collins, as portrayed by Melville Cooper, also known as the Sheriff of Nottingham. And he is hilarious. Why, one peeve is that they remove him from his rightful role as the rector of Hunsford and make him Lady Catherine's librarian. However, he is ideally played here, with the correct amount of foolishness yet self-importance that the role requires. A great moment is when he says Lady Catherine speaks to him as she would any other gentleman, and Elizabeth plays a sour note on the harp. So he manages to win over Mrs. Bennett, and then they walk to dinner. We are now taken to the Netherfield Ball. Fine. The Netherfield Garden Party. Darcy drinks some punch, rescues Elizabeth from Collins. Elizabeth and Darcy shoot archery. They argue and split off, and later he comes across her frustrated with her family, and again he shows her that he's in love with her, but she's... The man compliments her defense of Wickham, and she admits she finds it hard to believe her own opinion of her personality. And they agree to start over, though more embarrassing things to happen. Like I said, this is Pride and Prejudice, the fanfiction. And things start to pick up. Collins introduces himself to Darcy, and an amusing dance of the Highland Reel is had. Then a nice domestic scene which leads to Collins' proposal. Its aftermath, the letter from Caroline Bingley, and Charlotte's engagement. We then go to the Collins' visit, and it is what you'd expect, for the first part seems to happen all in one evening, and much to my amusement, Colonel Fitzwilliam is wearing a kilt. Fitzwilliam. That's an Irish name, ladies and gentlemen. Also, Anne de Bourgh is surprisingly pretty, and her illness is not as severe. Literally. In any case, we then cut to a very distraught Elizabeth, who receives what I feel is the nicest version of Darcy's proposal ever. Unsurprising, given the film's depiction of Darcy, and we all know what happens next. We then go back home where we discover that Wickham and Lydia's elopement. Now, I will say here that one of the interesting things in this version is that the whole neighborhood, as a consequence of Lydia's actions, turns on the Bennets, which is very interesting, and you usually don't see that happen. And they are preparing to leave when first Darcy comes and gives a verbal rendition of his letter. We then get to see Darcy tell off Caroline in a lovely moment, which has stuck with me since I first saw it, where Bingley whips the pool table they are playing on in irritation at her. And that was a really great line from Darcy. Then it is discovered that Wickham and Lydia have been wed, and he recently came into a nice amount of money. In any case, Lydia and Wickham turn up, and Wickham makes his most obvious lie yet. He stutters. Then Lady Catherine appears. Oh, we are about to see the great confrontation, and it is quite interesting. It is Lady Catherine who reveals that Darcy was the major force behind Lydia's marriage. It is quite fun and well done until Lady Catherine leaves and we discover that it was a test. That's right. A test. Darcy is waiting by the carriage and she tells him the conversation, causing him to be most jubilant. And Darcy has a beautiful conversation with Elizabeth, and we see Jane and Bingley together. Darcy kisses Elizabeth, and we see Kitty with Officer Denny and Mary with a musician called Mr. Withering. Or something like that. And thus ends the best Pride and Prejudice fanfiction period, that is, in existence. In short, this is a fun, good, wholesome film with laughter and love. While not the most faithful adaptation, it is still a fun one, and a great example of what you can do. Greer, Garson, and Laurence Olivier shine as Elizabeth and Darcy. Other notable performances are those of Marina Sullivan as Jane, Bruce Lester as Mr. Bingley, Edmund Gwynn and Mary Boland as Mr. and Mrs. Bennett, Melville Cooper as Mr. Collins, and Edna May Oliver as Lady Catherine de Bourgh. I highly recommend this film, and I would give it 7 out of 10 stars. You'll enjoy it if you are looking for a good telling of a classic tale and don't really care how faithful it is. Well, that's it for this review. And in the immortal words of Darcy's letter, and I will only add, God bless you. I am Thespian Bard, signing out. What?